Three in a series of brief videos on effective team communication. In this video, we're going to tackle resolving conflict and having difficult conversations. The first step is to ask yourself, what is your goal or what are your goals for having a difficult conversation? Hopefully, it's to find a solution to a problem or to repair the relationship or both. Notice that if you feel like you're trying to prove that you're right or you want to get the other person to change or admit that they were wrong, those are not good reasons or goals for having a difficult conversation. And it's just going to cause more drama and actually may result in more harm to the relationship than if you didn't have the conversation. So make sure that your goals or intentions or reasons have to do with genuinely wanting to resolve the conflict and repair the relationship. And here I want to show a couple of models for understanding conflict and approaching the process of resolution. The first one is based on this model that we've seen in both of the other videos, has to do with the fact, story, feelings model. And notice that, it's all about the story that we create and that other people create about the scenario. So by taking this model and using it as a template for having a difficult conversation, we end up with what the author of this book, 15 Commitments of Conscious Leadership, calls the clearing model. And so he says, first of all, let's start by making sure that this is a good time and a good setting for having a clearing conversation. So make sure that you've calmed down, the other person has calmed down, they're not being stressed or pulled in different directions, you're not being stressed, that you actually have a quiet, private place to have a conversation, and you have several minutes to make sure that you can devote some time to this process. Then, when you actually have the conversation, you want to start by sharing your positive intention. In other words, share with them the reason or reasons why you want to have this conversation. And this will help to sort of disarm the other person or make them not defensive by realizing that your heart is in the right place. So you might say something like, there's been something that's been bothering me, and I don't like how it's affected the way that I see you or the way that we relate to each other. There's something that happened that I know you know about and I know about, but it seems like it's gotten between us. And so I don't like that. I want to resolve it if I can. So however you describe it, start by expressing your intention for having this talk, this conversation. And then the structure for it is the facts, story, feelings model. So start by sharing the facts. In other words, how would a video camera capture what happened that was the cause or the root of this conflict? So many times this is so important because the way that you remember the facts aren't the way that the other person remembers them. So many times the communication breakdown or conflict is because the two people don't remember things quite the same way. They experience them differently. So start there by making sure that you both remember and agree as to what actually happened or what was said or what the process was that led to this current conflict. Then you don't have to use the word story. You could say, well, my interpretation or my opinion, my viewpoint, my what perspective was this. In other words, you're helping to explain what this meant to you, how you interpreted it. And then, of course, that's going to lead to sharing how you felt or feel about the scenario. So you're sharing the fact, story, feelings model, whether or not you use those terms to lay out the process. And usually, once you do that, the other person is very apologetic or at least open to having a conversation now and says, "Oh, no, no, that wasn't my intention. I'm glad you brought this to my attention because, I won't want you feeling that way. Please let me make sure that I don't do that in the future." So many times, just sharing this very candidly results in this conversation where you're able to resolve the conflict. And then it may be the case that you want to add a sixth step where you possibly be explicit about what you need or would like from the other person. So this goes back to video one, where we talked about all communication being about needs. And so you can be explicit about asking for what you need. Now, the other person isn't obligated to provide it, but at least by being very concrete and explicit, you're making it more likely that they'll know what to do or how to behave in a scenario in the future so that you don't have this conflict again. The other model comes from this book, Difficult Conversations. It's a very great, it's a very good book, and most of it is focused on how to prepare for the conversation. And a lot of it has to do with processing the emotions and being very psychologically minded and really asking yourself, why do I feel, first of all, what do I feel? Why do I feel this way? What is this coming from? How much of it is my issue and not the other person, and so forth. So trying to resolve as much of that as possible before having a conversation so that it doesn't feel so emotional at the actual time of the conversation. Then when you start to have the conversation, avoid blame, and you might even be explicit and say, I don't want to talk about blame. I don't want to use that word. I do think it's important that we focus on each of our contributions to the, process that got us to this point. And I'll go first. And you focus on, what did you do? What did you contribute? How did you contribute to this conflict? And you could say things like, I waited too long to have this conversation. Or, I first went to so and so and complained about this and complained about you, and that just caused more drama. And so that was, something I regret doing, but that was certainly a contribution to the conflict and how we got to this point. And throughout the conversation, try to stay curious and try to really understand the other person's experience and their perspective, and sort of go into this investigative journalist perspective where you're really just trying to understand and assume that you're going to write up a story about what the other person experienced. So instead of focusing on your own experience, you're really trying to understand the other person. And so as you're doing that and going through the process, practice these active listening skills of reflecting back what you hear, summarizing what you hear, and being sure to include emotions, both your emotions and the other person's emotions. So if we only stay focused on the facts or what happened and say, well, we just need to make sure that doesn't happen again, it's not going to be very satisfying because these conflicts, these difficult conversations, have emotions behind them. And so to feel satisfied and to feel complete, we have to address those emotions as well as the actual facts of what happened. So, general advice, or in conclusion, the more we can prepare, the better. So, processing your emotions, planning the wording that you're going to use, especially at the very beginning to kick things off. Think through in advance what happens if this arises, or what should I do if the person says this, and sort of imagine where the tricky spots might be or what your emotional reactions might be so that you're prepared so that if that happens, you know how to respond. You've already thought it through. And it may be helpful to role play the conversation with somebody that you trust so that you can get that practice beforehand. Always use I statements. And so if you say, well, I felt this way, I thought this, I experienced this, I did this, then the other person can't argue with that. As soon as you say you did something or you were this way, now they have something to argue with and they'll be defensive. So always use I statements and avoid you statements. And throughout the whole process, stay curious and try to play that role of detective, both toward yourself and understanding what's going on for you, and especially for the other person. And of course, the whole process is about sharing your stories and checking your assumptions, and letting that person do the same. And through the whole process, we're trying to step outside our own subjective or reactive experience and try to be more conscious or objective, and more of that investigative mode rather than a reactive emotional mode. And as we noticed in video two, the drama triangle just perpetuates conflict and doesn't result in resolution. So beware of the drama triangle and whether that's playing itself out, and try to avoid playing any of those three roles. So, like anything, a skill like having a difficult conversation or resolving conflict gets easier with practice. You get better at it with practice. We overcome some of our fears. And so I would encourage you to start with a small conflict to help build your confidence and to see that nothing bad happens. And the irony is that usually when somebody goes through this process of having a difficult conversation with someone, it actually causes the two people to become closer and creates a sense of intimacy that they don't have with other people because it's so rare to have these sort of candid, open conversations about feelings and stories and letting the other person share theirs. And so it actually brings two people together as opposed to our fear, which is that things will get worse or it'll just get more emotional. But if we follow these steps and these models, we should be on solid ground. So I wish you all the best as you continue to practice all these various facets of effective team communication.